Hi everybody, my name's Booksmarts, and today we'll be doing a 0 to Hero guide for the Blood Death Knight. We'll be breaking down the class as if you have zero experience or knowledge, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll have enough knowledge to crush achievements like Keystone Hero and AOTC. We'll be going over class and specialization abilities, cooldowns, talents, rotation, stat priority, gear, macros and add-ons, and a couple tips and tricks of blood tanking. I've been playing a blood tank since Wrath, and Blood DK was actually my first max level character. And since then, the spec has undergone lots of changes, but it's still my favorite tanking class. So without any further ado, let's get into it. DK is the first class to have more than one power system, runes and runic power, and you build and spend both as you play. For runes, most of your abilities will just cost a rune. You can see I have 6 here. And they regenerate over time, and the regeneration rate can be affected by haste or talents. For runic power, your main builder is Heartstrike, and your main spender is Deathstrike. One thing to note here is that Deathstrike heals you for a certain percent, but it also heals you for a percentage of damage taken over the last 5 seconds. So more advanced Blood DKs also track their damage taken, either subconsciously or through add-ons. Deathstrike is going to be the main way we Blood Death Knights are going to keep ourselves alive. We are selfish healers, and Deathstrike is our only heal. As Blood, you'll also have to keep track of how many Bone Shield charges you have. Bone Shield is our active mitigation. It's our first layer of protection, and when in combat, we should always have at least 5 stacks. You get 3 stacks by casting Merowin, or 1 from Descaress, and you lose a stack every couple seconds when you get autoed. Our dot ability and our AoE is baked into the same button, Blood Boil. And aside from Descaress, Blood Boil is the only way to apply our dot, so we want to use it a lot. Our other AoE ability is Death and Decay, which goes on the ground. Death and Decay also acts as a pseudo-defensive with talents, so we want to be in that as much as possible. And that's pretty much it for our basic abilities. Just keep Death and Decay down, keep your Bone Shield charges at more than 5, then build Runic Power with Heartstrike, and dump it with Deathstrike, while weaving in Blood Boils and keeping it on cooldown. Speaking of cooldowns, Blood Death Knights actually have a ton of cooldowns that can operate both offensively and defensively. Abomination Limb is our main offensive ability, and it helps with everything. Does damage, pulls in targets that aren't in melee, gives Bone Shield charges, just a great overall ability. We also have Empower Rune Weapon, which helps prevent our rotation from stalling whenever we run low on runes or runic power. And we have a little undead guy we can summon every couple minutes. As for defensives, we have quite a few. Vampiric Blood, which gives us increased HP and healing. Dancing Rune Weapon, which gives us increased parry, as well as doubling our dots and Bone Shield stack ability. Icebound Fortitude, a nice 30% damage reduction, with the added benefit of being unable to be stunned. Tombstone, which consumes Bone Shield stacks to give a shield. Fun note here, with talents, every Bone Shield stack that gets consumed reduces the cooldown of your Dancing Rune Weapon, so using Tombstone instantly knocks like half a minute off your Dancing Rune Weapon cooldown. We also have Lichborn, which gives some leech, damage reduction, and immunity to certain CCs. Anti-Magic Shield is a nice defensive that absorbs magic damage and nullifies some effects. And Anti-Magic Zone can create a barrier that reduces magic damage taken for everyone inside the bubble. Now there are a couple other defensive cooldowns, all talents, and we'll discuss in the talent section, but for the most part you don't really take them, so we'll just touch on them briefly later. Quickly we'll touch on utility though. Death Knights do have a lot of group utility, but unfortunately, due to the way our talent tree is set up, we have to forego most of them. We have a single target 5-second stun on a 45-second cooldown, an AoE Disorient on a 1-minute cooldown, of course our Death Grip, and 2 charges with talents. Abomination Limb, or Slappy Hands, gives some utility with its pulls, and we have our Bread and Butter Group Pull on a 2-minute or 90-second cooldown. We get an instant cast Battle Res, but it costs 35 runic power. And lastly, we have Death's Advance, our only movement speed ability. Hashtag wheelchair gang. Now that most of our abilities have been talked about, let's talk about talents. I'm going to walk you through both trees and show you a Mythic Plus build and a Raid build. One thing I will say regarding our trees, we do have a lot of room to choose this talent over that, depending on whatever challenge we face. With that being said, these builds aren't really static builds, more preference builds. So, class tree first. Row 1, we're given Deathstrike for free, but we take the other 2. Row 2, we take all 3 talents. Row 3, we have a couple options, but the static talents are Improved Deathstrike and Anti-Magic Barrier. This is my Mythic Plus talent tree, so the chosen talents are for Mythic Plus situations. I took Blinding Sleet, but in Raid, I'd recommend Permafrost. Now, if you're doing Mythic Plus and you don't need the AoE Disorient and are in need of more interrupts, then Cold Thirst is fine. I also have Control Undead for Incourt, but if you don't need the control, you can take Enfeeble for a little less damage taken. Sacrificial Pact just doesn't do enough damage or healing to justify taking it, and March of Darkness doesn't increase Death's Advance enough to make it worth spending the point. Row 4, Icebound Fortitude, Veteran of the Third War, and Brittle are all must-haves. Row 5, Merciless Strikes, Anti-Magic Zone, and Might of Thesaria. If your group doesn't need Anti-Magic Zone, I'd take Acclamation for the increased cooldown for IBF. Row 6, we take Gloomwort and Unholy Endurance, and then I personally take Grip of the Dead for more mob control, but if you don't have to, you can take Assimilation or Asphyxiate, depending on the situation. Row 7, we skip Wraithwalk and take the other two. Row 8, we take Insidious Chill, Will of the Necropolis, and Death's Echo. Will of the Necropolis is an absolute must-have. I think it masks out to just straight up like 10% more health, which is really nice. Row 9, we take Icy Talons and Rune Mastery. And row 10, we take Empower Rune Weapon and Slappy Hands. You can see we're skipping Unholy Bond and Soul Reaper. Truth be told, an Execute would be really nice, but we just don't have the points for it. But yeah, it's class tree, so now on the spec tree. Row 1, we take Heartstrike. Row 2, Merrowwind and Blood Boil. Row 3, Vamp Blood, and Crimson Scourge, which helps us to always be in our Death and Decay. Row 4, we take Improved Heartstrike, Death's Caress, and Ossuary. Ossuary is the reason why we always want at least 5 Bone Shield charges. It helps to decrease the cost of our Death Strike so we can keep pumping. Row 5, we'll take Heartbreaker, Foul Bulwark, Dancing Rune Weapon, and Relish in Blood. And there are 2 other great talents on this row that I haven't taken, but they're definitely worth talking about. Rune Tap is one of those defensives we mentioned briefly. It's a nice 20% DR on a 25-second recharge, really useful in raid situations where you'll be getting hit hard. Just helps guarantee that we don't die. Hemostasis is the other one. I really love the idea of this, hitting Blood Boil on 5 targets and bringing down a massive Death Strike for lots of damage and healing. And it's more of a first world problem, but the reason why we don't take this is because our Death Strikes already heal us for our max health without having to actually need the stacks. It's a really good idea, we just don't need it. Row 6, we take Improved Bone Shield, Rapid Decomposition, and Insatiable Blade. Dancing Rune Weapon generates 5 Bone Shield charges, and when a charge of Bone Shield is consumed, the cooldown of Dancing Rune Weapon is reduced by 5 seconds. Just a massive power up for Dancing Rune Weapon. Row 7, we take Reinforced Bones, Everlasting Bond, Voracious, and Coagulopathy. Reinforced Bones, just more armor. Everlasting Bond gives us a second Dancing Weapon for 3 weapons in total, which triples what our weapon does. For instance, when Dancing Rune Weapon is up, Merrowwind gives 9 Bone Shield stacks. And then Voracious is just more healing. Coagulopathy is more damage from our dot. Row 8, we take Tombstone, which is one of our defensives, and Sanguine Ground, which just buffs Death and Decay. Gorefiends is our other option, and we end up not taking it because we can actually get a lot of AoE pulls with Slappy Hands and just a lack of points. Row 9, we take everything but the Gorefiend CD. And then row 10, we take Purgatory and Bloodshot, at least for this setup. This is a really damage-heavy setup. One that you would take if you're fairly confident that you wouldn't die often. We still have Purgatory for mistakes or whatnot, but with this setup, we forego a lot of defensives for damage. If we weren't confident and we wanted as much tankiness as possible, we'd make a couple small changes. We'd get rid of Improved Heartstrike and take Improved Vampiric Blood instead. And then we'd move these 2 points over 1, like this, which would give us Umbilicus Eternus. And then over on the class tree, we'll get rid of Anti-Magic Zone for the extra cooldown on IBF. This is huge. These 5 talent point slides are absolutely massive for your major defensives. And with this tankier build, you should always aim to use your defensives as much as you can. Like, all of our changes benefit from using them as often as possible, so use them a lot. For raid, talents don't actually change too much. It's a bit of a mix between the damage and tankiness. We rock Bloodshot and Vampiric Blood, so a little bit of each. We trade Voracious for Rune Tap, and then we trade Coagulopathy for Bloodworms. Just that extra DR and then a little bit of extra healing under 50%. Depending on the need, though, you can also trade out the IBF cooldown for Anti-Magic Zone, just whatever's needed. And you can see we don't have Gore Fiends here, as it's not needed very often in Raid. But there are a couple of fights where it is needed this patch, so when you do take it, I would drop Shattering Bone at both points, and then just grab that and the extra CD on it. Now, speaking of Raid, though, our tier set for this season is the Risen Nightmare. Our 2 set, Consuming Runic Power, has a chance to cause your next Heart Strike to apply Ashen Decay, reducing damage dealt to you by 10% and increasing your damage dealt to afflicted targets by 20% for 8 seconds. And then 4 set, Soul Reapers execute damage or A-Bomb Limbs damage applies Ashen Decay to enemy targets, and Heart Strike and Blood Boil's direct damage extends Ashen Decay by a second. So after we spend Runic Power, we have a chance to put a debuff on someone with Heart Strike. We do more damage and take less damage, great. And Slappy Hands puts it on everybody, cool. And Heart Strike and Blood Boil extend it, which is really nice. Just pretty nice passive numbers, and the better you are with the class, the more useful to settle be. Perfect agency. So, how does it all work? Well, rotation-wise, if you're just starting up a fresh pull, I would start off with Dancing Rune Weapon, get Death and Decay out, and Blood Boil so you get your dot out. From there, it's all about building Runic Power with Heart Strike and spending it on Death Strike. You always want to make sure you have at least 5 charges of your Bone Shield, and always want to make sure you have your Death and Decay. And that's pretty much it. You'll be rotating through your cooldowns regularly as you pull, and don't hesitate to use them. They come back very quickly. And not all pulls will be the same. The important thing to know is that if you survive until you start your Death Striking, you'll probably be fine. So pop your defensive cooldowns early. And let me say again, Death Striking is the way you heal yourself. It is the reason you are so tanky. Like if Blood Death Knight was a single ability, this would be it. Right? Imagine you're starving and you have to eat your way through the entire dungeon by yourself. And Death Strike is the chew button. Like it is the good. Alright, with that being said, you gotta remember the whole point is to stay alive, so we Death Strike after we take damage, and we snipe the heals away from the healer. It's fun and technically ideal to use Death Strike at max Runic Power, even if we have full health, but if we die, it's 100% our fault. So don't get caught not having any Runic Power, because you spent it all Death Striking when you didn't need to. And in Raid, you want to be a little more conservative with your cooldowns. This tier there are a couple bosses that are solo tankable, but for the most part, each boss has a tank swap. So don't get caught without a defensive because you used them all when it wasn't your turn to tank. And that's pretty much it. That's blood tanking in a nutshell. Now for the technicalities, starting with stat prio. As of the moment, I have looked up these stats, which will forever remain an indeterminate point in time. It's actually really even. As long as the item's item level is the highest you have, chances are it's the best item you have. And each secondary stat synergizes really well with everything else, so as long as things are fairly balanced, you're good to go. And if you have a preference, like you like more haste, then get more haste. As long as you don't end up going over the soft cap and wasting stats. But if you're interested in knowing what the top players are running, then for Mythic Plus, you want versatility and mastery at the first soft cap, and then the remainder in haste. So around like 25%-ish verse, 70-ish% mastery, and 20 to 25-ish% haste. For Raid, you want to soft cap haste and versatility and put the rest into crit. So about 30% crit, 30% haste, 30% mastery, and like 25% versatility. For gear, you definitely want to get 4-piece, your tier set. If you're just coming in from last season, you want to break into your 2-set as soon as possible, and then get into your 4-set as soon as possible. This tier, we have access to the legendary weapon Fear Loss. Unfortunately, I don't have mine on my Death Knight. Hopefully soon, though. For trinkets, we got a few pretty good options. I have Razan Zion for Ferox Rageheart. Ferox Rageheart is BIS for a lot of classes, and every tank, if I'm not mistaken. And Razan Zion is just a great single target. Ashes of the Ember Soul off Smolderon would be a great AoE damage option. And we already have the Purgatory talent, but Prophetic Stone Scales can be a nice second cheat death. For enchants, Death Knights specifically get access to Rune Forging, where they can apply special enchants to their weapons. You always want to use Rune of the Fallen Crusader. For the chest, Waking Stats. For the legs, you want the Fierce Armor Kit. Extra health on the belt, and then for the tertiary stats, I prefer speed, so I've got Plains Runner's Breeze, and then speed elsewhere. Stat of preference on the rings, and then Raid Enchant on the helm if you have it. For consumables, I use the Howling Rune, because I like the haste, Vials of Tepid Verse, stat food, and then an augment rune. Draconic runes are obviously better, but these are only like 10 gold, so I use these unless I'm doing max level content. For macros and add-ons, I don't really have any add-ons specifically for Death Knights, but weak ores should always be mentioned. You can see a bunch of abilities and things here in the middle of my screen. That's weak ores. They help track so much, and if you use add-ons and don't have weak ores, you should definitely consider it. For macros, I've got a handful of macros, mainly just cooldown, like condensers, swifty macros, and then I have a cursor macro for my death and decay, so it goes wherever my cursor is. As a tank, though, it is your job to direct the party, even more so as a tank that heals itself. So I have a few different world marker ones here, so whenever I'm in a party, I can just place the world markers in certain points. Really useful, that way we don't have to type. And yeah, that concludes my 0 to hero guide for Blood Death Knight. At this point, you should hopefully have the knowledge to take your blood tank into raids and dungeons and be the hero everyone wants. If you stayed with me to this point, I want to say thank you for listening to my guide. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. If you did, or if you didn't, please make sure to leave a like and hit that good old subscribe button for me. And leave me a comment. Tell me something I don't know about Blood, or tell me what spec you want me to cover next. But yeah. Alright, everybody, take care.